Welcome back to The Deep Dive. We're continuing our journey down the rabbit hole of the financial industry. And today, we're tackling a really big one.
We certainly are.
We're looking at how finance and politics collided in post-Soviet Russia to pull off, well, one of the biggest, fastest transfers of state wealth ever seen. It's the story of how the modern Russian oligarchs were born, the fraud, the chaos, the Western involvement. We're calling it the Great Heist, or maybe, more accurately, what people there called it, Piratisation.
Yes, Privatization. It's like a crucial story if you're tracking global finance. Because the Soviet Union didn't just collapse politically on December 26, 1991. Fundamentally, it was a financial implosion.
Right.
And that whole decade, the 90s, is burned into memory in Russia as the Likhai Devyanisti, the wild 90s.
Yeah.
It was such a mess that people started calling the reforms katastroika. You know, catastrophe plus perestroika.
Catastrophe plus perestroika.
Wow. So our mission today is to get past just the idea of chaos. We want to show you the specific financial gears turning, the mechanisms sometimes advised by Westerners that led to this massive fraudulent transfer, and how it, well, structurally limits the Russian economy even now.
Absolutely. And it starts, really, with the Soviet economy itself. It was rotting from the inside long before 1991.
And it was all hidden by oil money, wasn't it?
To a large extent, yes. But even before the oil crunch, the core system, the Central Planning Committee, Gosplan, it was paralyzed. By the 1980s, it was just hopelessly complex and inefficient.
How inefficient are we talking?
Well, our sources say planners were literally overwhelmed. Imagine reports the size of phone books landing on your desk. Decisions made 10 years earlier sometimes still hadn't been implemented.
A decade.
Yeah, so you got chronic shortages, stagnation. The whole thing was creaking badly.
But oil kept the lights on, so to speak. The USSR got caught in that classic Ricardian trap, right? Just keep pumping the raw materials instead of fixing the underlying problems. Precisely. They doubled down on oil and gas extraction, even as costs rose, just to fund the state. And for a while, prices were incredibly high, peaking at the equivalent of $134 a barrel, in today's money around 1980.
Wow.
But then came the crash. By 1986, prices plummeted below $10 a barrel. $10.
Oof.
That was a substantial financial blow. You could argue it was the final straw that really bankrupted the Soviet state.
So then Gorbachev comes in with perestroika in '85, trying to fix things.
But it backfired, really. It was like an uncontrolled demolition. He tried to decentralize things a bit, but crucially, he kept price controls, and the ruble wasn't convertible.
What'd that do?
It broke supply chains, created massive hidden inflation, people started hoarding goods. It actually just sped up the final collapse in '91.
So the Soviet Union dissolves. Yeltsin's in charge of the new Russia, and the prescription is radical.
Oh, yeah. Shock therapy. That was the term.
Yeah.
And it was heavily influenced by Western advisors pushing the Washington consensus. Stabilize, privatize, liberalize, do it all, do it now. Yegor Gaidar was the main Russian architect pushing this.
And this is where the Western involvement gets murky, doesn't it? The Harvard connection.
Deeply murky.
Yes.
The Harvard Institute for International Development, or HII, they got millions in U.S. aid funding from USAID, specifically to advise Russia on privatization. The idea was they'd bring expertise, transparency.
But that's not quite how it played out.
Not at all. The project leaders, Andrei Schleifer and Jonathan Hay, were later found by the U.S. government to have, and I quote, used their positions as advisors to profit from investments in the country.
Wow. So the guys advising on setting up fair markets were using inside info to play the markets themselves.
Exactly that. It was a massive conflict of interest. Harvard eventually had to pay a $26.5 million settlement, the largest of its kind, actually. It just shows how compromised the whole process was right from the start.
Unbelievable. Okay, so with that backdrop, phase one kicks off. Voucher privatization in 1992. What was the idea there?
Well, the idea of the sales pitch was popular capitalism. Every single Russian citizen got a voucher worth 10,000 rubles. You know, a share in the nation's wealth.
Sounds okay on paper?
Maybe. But here's the catch. The state basically just made up a total value for all its assets, factories, oil fields, everything. And the value they chose was ludicrously low, something like $5 to $10 billion.
$8 billion? For the entire Russian industrial base?
Exactly. It was a fire sale disguised as fairness. And for ordinary Russians living through hyperinflation, we're talking 2,520% in 1992.
2,500%.
Yeah. Savings were wiped out. People were desperate. So what's a 10,000 ruble voucher worth to you then?
Not much, I guess. Especially if you need cash now.
Precisely. Our sources say most people sold their vouchers very quickly for tiny sums. sometimes, quite literally, for a bottle of vodka. So who benefited? The insiders. The old Soviet factory managers, the red directors, and this new class of well-connected operators who bought up these vouchers for next to nothing.
And the reformers, like Anatoly Chubais, who was overseeing this, did they not see how unfair it was?
Oh, they saw it? Chubais was actually quite open about it later. He basically said speed was more important than fairness.
Speed? Why?
Politics. The goal was to create a private property-owning class so fast and irreversibly that the communists couldn't come back and renationalize everything, make reversal impossible. That was the priority, not economic efficiency or equity.
So create owners, any owners, quickly.
That was the logic. Quality later, if ever.
Which brings us neatly, if tragically, to phase 2. This is the real heart of the privatization, isn't it? The loans for shares scheme in 95, 96.
Absolutely. If voucher privatization was about distributing the smaller stuff, this was about the crown jewels. The huge oil and gas companies, the metals giants, the strategic core of the economy.
And this was tied directly to Yeltsin's political survival.
Completely. It was 1995, heading into the 96 election. Yeltsin's approval ratings were terrible, sometimes in the low single digits. He looked like he might lose to the communists who were making a comeback.
So he needed money and support. Fast.
Desperately. Money for the state budget, which was empty, and money for his re-election campaign. And the rising bankers, the guys who'd done well out of the early chaos, they saw an opportunity.
The famous quid pro quo, tycoons for Yeltsin, as it's called.
That's the one. A small group of these bankers loaned the government money. In return, the government put up shares in these massive state companies as collateral.
Okay, but how did the oligarchs actually get the shares? The government was supposed to pay the loans back.
That was the theory. But the whole thing was rigged. The government, shall we say, intentionally defaulted on these loans, predictably. And then the shares went up for auction. But here's the genius, or the crime, of it. The very same banks that had made the loans were appointed by the government as the official auctioneers.
Wait, they ran the option to sell the collateral to themselves?
Or to a friendly face. They completely controlled the process. Our sources call it a fraudulent shambles. They manipulated the system by excluding all but one or a few bidders. It was a closed shop.
So they bought the best assets in Russia for the price of the loans they themselves had made.
Pretty much. The numbers are just staggering when you look at the specifics. Take Mikhail Khodorkovsky. His bank, Menatep, got control of Yukos, the oil giant. Yukos was estimated to be worth maybe $5 billion. He paid $310 million.
$300 million for $5 billion.
Roughly, yes. Or Boris Berezovsky, he got Sibneft, another huge oil company worth maybe $3 billion, the price?
Right.
Around $100 million.
Good grief.
And maybe the most blatant example, Vladimir Putin. He actually came up with the whole loans for shares idea. His reward, Norilsk Nickel, the world's biggest nickel and palladium producer. He paid $170.1 million.
For Norilsk Nickel, the company that basically controls the global supply of those metals.
$170 million. It's hard to grasp the scale. This scheme cemented the power of that small group, the Semi-Bankershina, the rule of 7 bankers. Maybe they didn't control half the economy, as one of them boasted, but they absolutely grabbed the strategic heights.
Okay, so these guys get incredibly rich, incredibly quickly, holding these massive assets. What's the first thing they do?
Get the money out. Fast. If you acquire assets in such a dubious, politically dependent way, you don't feel secure, so you see massive capital flight.
How much are we talking?
Estimates vary, obviously, but some suggest up to $140 billion left Russia just between 1992 and 1997. That's running at something like 15% of the country's entire GDP each year, just pouring out.
15% of GDP? How did they even manage to move that much money?
A lot of it was through clever, though often legal, trade schemes. The main one was transfer pricing. It's crucial to understand this if you want to see how the looting worked.
Okay, break it down for us.
Right. So imagine you're an oligarch. You own a Russian oil company. You sell your oil, but not directly onto the world market. Instead, you sell it first to a shell company that you also secretly control, probably set up in Cyprus.
Okay.
But, and here's the trick, you sell it to your Cyprus shell company for a fraction of the real world price, say $10 a barrel when the market price is $50.
Why would you do that?
Because the Russian state only gets to tax the profit on that internal $10 sale. Then, your Cyprus shell company immediately sells the same oil onto the world market for the full $50.
Ah, so the $40 difference, the real profit, is booked offshore in Cyprus?
Exactly. safely outside Russia, away from Russian taxes, away from potential political risks or repatriation rules. It systematically starved the Russian state of revenue and the economy of investment capital.
And Cyprus was the main hub for this.
Cyprus became the crucial gateway, yes. But the money didn't just sit there. It flowed into the global financial system. And that brings us to the Bank of New York scandal in the late 90s.
Right, I remember that. Bo NY.
Yeah, it perfectly showed the connection. Somewhere between $7.5 and $10 billion linked to Russian organized crime and these illicit capital flows was laundered through seemingly respectable Bank of New York accounts.
And wasn't there a connection back to the Russian government figures involved in the reforms?
There's incredible irony. One of the key Bonwai employees managing these accounts was married to Konstantin Kogalovsky, who had been Russia's representative to the IMF right back during the shock therapy period we were just discussing.
Oh, the connections are just everywhere.
It really blurred the lines between the architects of reform, the beneficiaries of the chaos, and the Western financial institutions enabling it all.
So while the oligarchs and bankers are doing this, what's happening to ordinary Russians? You mentioned the hyperinflation.
It was devastating. The catastroika. Savings vanished overnight with that 2,520% inflation in 92. The entire economy shrank dramatically by almost half between 91 and 97.
It's half the economy gone.
Pretty much. But it's more than just economic stats. It was a human catastrophe. This is where you see the real cost. Male life expectancy. This is stunning. It collapsed from about 63.5 years in 1991 down to a low of 57.6 years by 1994.
57, that's horrific. Yeah. Peacetime collapse like that.
Almost unprecedented in a modern industrialized nation. It speaks volumes about the stress, the poverty, the breakdown of public health, the despair.
And inequality. Russia used to be relatively equal, didn't it?
Extremely equal by industrialized standards. The Gini coefficient, which measures inequality, was very low, around 21.9 in 1989. By 1996, it had exploded to 51.8.
What does that mean in real terms?
It means Russia went from Scandinavian levels of equality to something approaching Latin American levels of inequality almost overnight. A tiny group got fabulously wealthy while millions were plunged into poverty.
You can see how that experience would just destroy any faith in democracy or liberal reform, can't you? People would associate it with chaos, corruption, getting robbed.
Absolutely. That deep national trauma created the opening, the mandate, for someone like Vladimir Putin to come in promising one thing above all else: order, stability, to end the chaos of the 90s.
So Putin takes power. What happens to their oligarchs who got rich in the 90s? Does he take it all back?
Not exactly. He offered them a kind of deal, a pact. The rules of the game changed. And the Yukos affair in 2003 really spelled out those new rules.
That was Khodorkovsky, right? The guy who got Yukos so cheaply.
The very same. He had actually turned Yukos into a pretty efficient modern oil company. But he broke the implicit pact.
Which was?
Keep your money, keep your assets from the 90s, fine. But stay out of politics. Completely. Khodorkovsky started funding opposition parties, challenging Putin politically.
And the response?
Swift and brutal. The state suddenly hit Yukos with enormous, basically invented back tax claims over $30 billion.
$30 billion.
Yeah, it bankrupted the company. Khodorkovsky was jailed, and Yukos' best assets were confiscated and handed over to the state-owned oil company, Rosneft.
So the lesson was clear.
Crystal clear. You got rich through political connections in the 90s. You could lose it all through political disloyalty in the 2000s. Property rights in Russia were now fundamentally conditional on loyalty to the Kremlin. And enforcement came via the state security apparatus, the Siloviki, the men of force.
And that dynamic shapes the whole system today, this kind of state capitalism.
Precisely. It's not really private enterprise in the Western sense. Major assets are either state-owned or in the hands of loyal oligarchs whose ownership is ultimately dependent on the Kremlin's goodwill.
Looking at Russia's economy right now, in 2025, you can still see the ripples, can't you? This two-speed economy they talk about.
Very clearly. You've got the military sector booming, fueled by massive state spending. What is it, 6.2% of GDP now?
I think that's right.
So defense industries are growing, but the civilian economy, things like food processing, furniture, textiles, it's stagnating or even shrinking. There's a real disconnect.
But there's an even more direct, almost haunting legacy from the 90s hitting them right now, isn't there?
Yes. And it's possibly the most profound structural constraint they face today: the acute labor shortage.
How does that connect back to the 90s?
Directly through demography. Remember that collapse in life expectancy, the economic chaos, It led to a massive dip in births and a rise in deaths. The generation that should be entering their prime working years now, the people needed for factories, for the army, for everything, that generation is much smaller because of the catastroika 30 years ago.
So the demographic echo of the 90s disaster is choking off growth today.
It's a major factor. The chaos of the past is creating a resource crisis in the present. It's a really stark example of how those events cast such a long shadow.
So if we pull it all together, this whole dive into the finances of the collapse, the privatization wasn't really a failure in its own terms, was it? It successfully transferred wealth.
It was a highly successful transfer, yes. It didn't create a competitive market economy, obviously. It essentially swapped a state monopoly for a private oligopoly, which has now been brought back under state control, or at least state dominance, by Putin and the Siloviki.
Leaving Russia with this kind of crony capitalist system.
Fundamentally, yes. Which is why the consensus forecast you hear now, through 2027 at least, is one of managed stagnation. Growth is dependent on state spending, particularly military, but the underlying structure struggles. Russia seems set to slowly fall behind the rest of the world.
So what's the final takeaway, the big picture thought for us?
Well, I think it comes back to legitimacy and property rights. The entire structure of ownership in modern Russia rests on that foundation from the 1990s, a foundation of, let's be blunt, mass fraud and human catastrophe, overseen or at least enabled by political power.
Right.
If that original transfer was never really seen as legitimate by the population, and if property can still be gained or lost based purely on political loyalty today, can that system ever achieve genuine stability? Can it generate long-term, broad-based growth that isn't just pumped up by state cash? Or is it structurally doomed to rely on coercion and cronyism? That, I think, is the fundamental question, the enduring legacy of the Great Heist.
A sobering question indeed. That was a fascinating and disturbing look under the hood of post-Soviet finance. Thanks for walking us through your sources.
My pleasure.
And thank you for joining us on the Depth Dive. We'll catch you next time.